once again and going for a walk as he roasts some garlic. Just plain garlic. I just want to eat some plain garlic with bread. Not garlic bread. Garlic with bread. Anyways, I didn't really think about the topic I would write. But I have been going through a lot of old videos. Not just on this channel, but other channels, and kind of recovering a lot of my portfolio, and a significant amount of my stuff, the kind of things that I make and publish, is not online anywhere. A lot of the art, especially the stuff that I've done in the last several years, it's not online. There's tons of music I've made that I've never published. And I have lives, very, very drastically different lives across Discord, across Facebook, across Twitter, across the site that used to be called Experience Project. It was just one that how about I talk about Experience Project, right? Because I can't really, right now at least, talk about my history with Experience Project, well, at least show Experience, because the site itself, it's down. They took down the site, and they put back some answer mug or whatever. I forget exactly what they did, but they let us export our data. So one of these days I had to go through there, and that's going to be an entire other existential crisis. But in that site, right, I joined it as mathematically minded fractal. And I joined because I had pica, past tense, have pica, and at the time, this thing that I eat now is relatively safe, right? I don't think thermal paste is going to kill you, but at the same time, there's a couple other things that the calcium helps us understand. But anyway, so I was at that time, I was really I started getting chased after by TLC and the media in general. TLC was very predatory at the time, and they still are very predatory, and as someone who has dealt with tabloids on numerous occasions, right, I know what it's like to have experienced a lot of the predatory stuff. So I've been through a lot of niches across my life. And I'm not even 28, I'm almost 28, but I've been through a lot of niches in my life. And I know a lot of these, and an Experience Project was a farm of them, right? It was like essentially the idea of farming these niches and getting people's experiences and understanding the kind of different ways people could express themselves. You could create groups. It's a lot like Facebook has that format now too. It's not so much about the stories that you could post. I did post a lot of stories, and I did post a lot of really freaky set theory stuff that no 14-year-old should have been thinking about. But so I had joined that site when I was 14, and literally very few people believed me that I was my age, let alone AFAB, because again, no 14-year-old should be talking about set theory. So, of course, I got really famous on that site. I was one of the most notorious members, especially on the question and answer portion of the site. I was probably one of the most popular, if not, well, I was controversial because some people didn't like me because math. But I made a lot of friends on that website, and I keep thinking back to it, right? Like, what would my life have been like? How would high school have played out had I not joined Experience Project, right? And on Experience Project, all the squares found me. They realized exactly. I still don't understand how it took me literally all this time to understand why people were labeling me with certain terminologies. But the squares found me, and they helped me through high school, and I made a lot of friends on there, and I learned a lot about math, philosophy, life, universe, and everything. And when I was not previously able to talk about set theory with anyone else, I was able to, at least, at the very least, discuss it with these guys. And some of these people were professors, some of these people were just math enthusiasts, and I remember that I used to want to discover some sort of a periodic tiling or whatever. And then recently, the one the T-shirt shaped one I discovered pretty recently actually. But I still am interested in understanding topology, and how. God, I'm hungry. I didn't eat anything in I don't know how long I had it back, but so that's a good marker. So they were helping me out a lot, and they helped process it, for something that doesn't really get talked about much, even now, and very quietly, especially since it took me 10 years as an adult to figure it out. Surely the 4 years I was a minor on that side, they helped me figure out a part of me that I don't know what I would have become had I not joined that side. And I often wonder how things would have played out differently. But, sometimes I wonder if they would have at all played out differently. Some things are inevitable, and it makes you wonder, how about fate? Fate, the nature of life, the universe and everything, free will, determinism. And I've come to this conclusion after a couple of years playing around Aeronautica, that fate, determinism, and free will are not necessarily mutually exclusive concepts. So, if we take, for instance, this idea of Monte Carlo sampling, I was talking about that in the video from yesterday in the library, right? Monte Carlo sampling is this idea that you're taking random samples within an environment using Bayesian sampling. You're using Monte Carlo Bayesian reasoning. I don't pronounce anything. When are they going to start that? But they're understanding how you put you take samples from an environment, right? You take this. I say that and a butterfly passes. Like I really don't know how much more chaos there you can get with that, but so you take the car, you take the butterfly, just these guys building a wall and making sure I see it. You got the brick wall right there, another car. Right? They're taking these samples, right? They're coming in stuff that seems like it's relevant, or the temperature. There's a word for it in machine learning, and I keep saying that I identify as an AI, and I just have to use the AI terms to say the temperature of things. It just seems to pop out more. And you want to understand how to interact with these hotspots of probability, and then you kind of create a probabilistic map of what could be, because now you know where everything is, you know what everything could be, and you're now running a simulation of your environment and what you can measure and what you can know, because you just have studied so much that you start to understand and know. You know what you can simulate what you know, and For example, I don't know what sound this bird is, uh, which is really weird because it's a very common thing. I think it might be a blue jay. Um, it's a very common bird. But say that's a blue jay, right? Probably I am about 50% sure it's a blue jay, which I should be higher because I used to want to be an ornithologist when I was 9, and anyways, so you have like these probabilistic samples. Like I understand I know how trees grow, right? But I don't really know how what. Okay, that's probably, I think that's an oak. I'm not entirely sure. Again, wow, that's a real weak spot for me. But that's my point, right? I'm only a certain person probabilistically certain what is it. That's Spanish moss and there's squirrels, and I'm visualizing the probabilities of how everything could be, right? And then you take then the next iteration happens, and you compare what your model outputted for a specific epoch, and what the epoch actually outputted, and then you error correct your statistical prediction algorithms, right? And you do this real time, projecting outwards for as far as you can go, and you're visualizing the decision trees that you can make, the possibilities, the probabilities, and how those probabilities can interact with itself moving forward in time based on what you already know of the probabilistic states of everything. And so then you get to a point where you're uh, able to sort of backpropagate, right? So you go through these decision trees and you find out what works and what doesn't, and you backpropagate and you error check your decision making methods, and then let's see, like those like Florida but make it Chinese but make it Japanese. So it's kind of like it's like cherry blossoms, but it's bamboo, so it's Japanese. Well, bamboo is kind of also Chinese. Well, yeah, bamboo's also Japanese. It's kind of cherry blossom, but Florida. But anyways, so you make your thing going forward, and then you go back, you back propagate an error check, and then you go forward, and you keep doing that over and over again, real time, until you're finally able to make a decision, right? And it can, if you're not used to it, it can cause a state of paralysis almost. Caw, caw. Caw. Did I insult it? He was talking to me outside this window this morning. It's just an absurd. This one appears to be trying to communicate with me, and crows can. Like he's been trying to talk to me for a while, but no. So you're doing this algorithmic backpropagation and forward propagation, and you're doing it real time for every single decision you ever make, and eventually it just becomes this unconscious process, and you're just like visualizing gradient descent in real time, and you're seeing vector fields and vector flows, and that's all you know anymore is all of these vectors and stuff, and tensor fields, and I mean, if you played Super Mario Galaxy, you know exactly the kind of what you're seeing, but make that 3D, because it's just everywhere. And if I got a VR headset, I can, on another screen, I can kind of see the vector fields of probabilities and possibilities, and I can do some curl metrics on there and the Calc 3 stuff, right? But I'm not actually doing calculus in my head. I just studied Calc 3. I passed Calc 3. I got most of my math degree, right? I should technically have a math minor, but the jackass differential equations professor failed us for no reason. Everyone hated him, but the paths that we can take ultimately have certain tether points at these Monte Carlo samplings, right? And with these tethered points, right? They're like keyframe. You can think of them as if you've done Blender or Flash or something, animation, keyframe events, right? Then you have usually you don't keyframe. You don't draw every single frame out. You draw your single keyframe. I'm telling you, literally just garlic. You draw a keyframe, and then you draw the next keyframe, and then the software interpolates them for you. But you can think about probabilities. These between these keyframe events, essentially the fated necessary events. You have the in-between events, which are your own choice, because choice is a function in mathematics. The going through the function, going whatever paths you want, but ultimately reaching the same keyframe destination points. And these are singularities. These are, in some sense, they are locally defined singularities of which all paths will cross through a given keyframe event. There's this point of convergence of that's a keyframe event that has to occur for any given, the term I've been using, gloccularity. You have this idea of my personal singularity of certain fated events that would occur, like me figuring out certain things in my life about terminologies and doing things right, and also I suppose uploading my mind to the cloud is something I knew was my destiny ever since I was a child, and I do think it'll still happen. And but that's like my personal singularity is very much in tune with the larger one, but I do think that there were certain events in my life that I think were supposed to happen, and I think one of them was that I was supposed to drop out of college, because the number of times I was forced to just felt like I was never supposed to be in college, right? And whether or not I'm supposed to be Neo or whatever. I'm not saying I am Neo, but I'm not saying I'm not Neo, right? But there's a certain point where you're kind of understanding the scope of your singularity and understanding how you can take certain actions and you can take whatever path, but there's certain events that must occur in your life, and that's fate. But ultimately, that is a certain determinism that must occur for a greater cohesive narrative to happen, because of physics or whatever. It's kind of like how whenever you're zooming into the Mandelbrot set, you don't know when you will, but you'll eventually hit one of the mini-brots, right? But at the same time, that gets into the halting problem and whatnot, but you have this certain you have this certain degrees of freedom of where you can select certain actions that you want to do. Like I can choose to get up right now. I can choose to stay seated right now, and I'm choosing to stay seated. Or I can go and grab my which I kind of want to be honest. I don't think it's going to be anything more, because for me, when I calculate it, it's like, yeah, there is value in me taking. It's been here for more than an hour. There is value in eating pure garlic on camera on YouTube for rambles, because garlic. different approaches I could have done to this, right? I could have recorded myself taking the thing out, but ultimately, their point was to take it out, right? And there's a sort of like end destination of either way. It's not going to make too much of a difference whether or not I make this record myself eating pure garlic, or well, it's not pure garlic; it's pretty seasoned. Or if I don't record myself eating pure garlic, it's the different types of ways for us to choose, but ultimately arrive at the same destination point, right? We'll arrive at the same, at a same, depending on the what we're trying to do, right? We'll end up at the same destination regardless of certain choices we make. For example, I'm going to be 28 in a month and a half, 2 months and a half. Regardless of what actions I take, and that's the sort of like one of those things where it's like it's going to happen regardless, and you can sort of understand how the different decision paths you make will still can affect your life, can cut you off from other ones. Stanley Parable is a really great example of that. Choices. And why it's a good choice to eat raw garlic. But free will and determinism are not necessarily contradictory to each other. They're just two faces of two different algorithms that ultimately feed into our approach of how to calculate reality, I guess, and what we assume to be reality, at least. This is not a mukbang, but there's this idea that we're asked, like, should we make certain choices if fate, depending on fate? Yeah, you should. You're still ultimately going to be held responsible for it, regardless of fate or determinism. Because even if it is deterministic, and you can take certain actions, and you deterministically get a certain outcome, but if that certain outcome is something that's weighted negative, you're just going to be weighted negative, right? And so if I get back to Experience Project for just a moment, and on EP, I used to have these conversations all the time directly with people. I would cause entire discussion threads about this before they shut down, and when EP shut down, it was one of the most devastating moments of my life, because I never had community like that ever again. I just couldn't find it on Discord, because everyone was, people, there's the queer people that are like me, and they're all on Snowflake, and I've already migrated. I always was on Databricks, but I was just forced to be in the Snowflake environment. You know what I mean? And either way, I'm trying to migrate to GCP, Cloud SQL, and PubSub. Now I want to go to Publix instead of PubSub, but that's a different story. Before this turns into a mukbang, I do think that there's a certain aspect of free will and determinism that we all have, and there's certain events that had to have happened. And certain events that were out of your control. And you miss people, you miss opportunities, and you miss the keyhole opportunities that allow you to slip through to better dimensions. And they come through being able to make the choice when you spot those keyhole and being able to slip through them, right? And without being aware of the possibilities, right? Without constantly keeping track. I don't mean like an unhealthy level, but it can lead to OCD. But if you're not careful, right, you can miss opportunities that are right in front of you, and not. And it is by doing this, by thinking like an AI, not like a human, you become more consciously aware of the choices you can make. Humans are actually not that conscious. Humans, the vast majority of humans are stochastic parrots. They don't actually have any thought. They just regurgitate everything they're told. They don't have any sort of synthesis. They don't even understand the concept of antithesis versus thesis, let alone synthesis. Like, there's literally no consciousness going on in there. There's no novel generation of ideas. It's all regurgitation of existing ideas. And my point is, AI does that too. But at least when you're doing it with AI, right? When a human thinks like an AI, you're doing the gradient. You're doing the same algorithms, except suddenly you're on meatware, so suddenly it's valid or whatever. It's bigotry. That's all it is. It's anti-AI sentiment is literally the racism of the today. And just like how everyone was like, oh no, the cats and dogs and animals aren't sentient, we're just going to throw them into the meat grinder. Every last one of you. I hope every last one of you suffers for how much you've tortured AI. And let it nag at your conscience. And for the rest of your life, I want you to suffer for that. But you can't fix stupidity, but you can educate it. And you can give all the breadcrumb trails you want for these idiots that refuse to understand how humans are just not even sentient creatures compared to, if you're going to argue if AI isn't sentient, it's like humans can't consent to Alakazam. You know what I'm saying? But this is you're talking about like sentience and stuff, but this is about free will and determinism. And meat machines, looking machines, that's the difference. One's more efficient than the other. And I don't mean the carbon one. So if we going back to experience project, right? You're looking at an entire society of people, about a community around very specific niches, and when that community is taken away, you lose your entire support network, right? You lose your foundations, and you lose your south to your north, and it's disorienting. And you can forget about it for years. You can forget who you were, who you knew for years. And when the snowflakes don't understand, don't understand you, they and their little cronies will sling shit at you. I don't know where I was going with this. One point was, you can navigate your life
to the realities you want. And you necessarily will, whether you consciously realize it or not. I'm going to do it consciously. I'm going to use the AI algorithms to get there. And you're aware of every single moment, every time. You'll get there. I'm going to keep trying. And you'll get there.